Hello and welcome everyone to this AMBER and BGA webinar. I'm joined here with Waterstones, and this session will be on artificial intelligence in higher education, hopeful, harmful, or just a hype. I'm looking forward to an hour of really interesting insight, and shortly I'll be handing it over to our speaker, Stan Neal. Now, before I do, I want to remind everyone we want to keep these webinar sessions as interactive as possible. So there will be some Slido questions you can scan with your QR code to answer. And if you have any further questions, you can always pop it into the Zoom and Stan will be happy to answer them at the end. Now, if you miss anything, don't worry, because we are recording this, and the slides will also be available in the post-event comms and on the Amber and BJ website. Now, without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Stan. Stan?
Brilliant, thank you very much. I'm assuming the screen share is working okay for everyone still, and we can all see that. Fantastic. Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. As mentioned, we're trying to keep this very interactive. I've got a bit of an agenda in terms of what we're going to talk through, but what I will do as well is give a bit of context on who we are. So my name's Stan Neal. I'm Sector Principal for Education at Waterstones. And I think before I get into the detail of who Waterstones are, my own background is probably pretty relevant here. So I joined the business about 3 years ago, and prior to that, I had worked a number of different universities. So I'd spent over a decade working in higher education at different types of institutions before I joined Waterstones. So I am not very much non-technical actually in terms of background, very much a background in the sector, understanding our higher education and the challenges therein. I should say also I'm joined on the call by my colleagues Joanne and Jen from Waterstones today as well. So great to meet everybody and be welcomed here. Hopefully this clicks through. So who are Waterstones? Well, we are a technology and business consultancy. We've got 3 offices in the UK. We've also got an office in Australia. We provide services in a range of different areas. So we've got some of our service areas on screen here, ranging from things like cybersecurity, mergers and acquisitions, managed services, data and AI, digital solutions and development. And so we offer a range of different service areas. And as I mentioned, we've got 3 offices in the UK, 1 in Australia, but we've got a real specialism in higher education. And so I've got on screen there in terms of as a size of an organisation, just under 300 consultants. But across the portfolio of different clients that we have, when I just checked today, we've got 62 live projects in education with 23 different institutions and organisations in the sector. So that sector experience is really relevant to what we do. And one of the taglines I've got in there is that we're big enough to deliver as an organisation. We're a reasonable sized technology consultancy, but also small enough to care and small enough to understand the challenges that are kind of unique to education. So, and I've got some of our different education clients on the screen here as well. And you probably note there's quite a range of different types of institution. I know not all of the people on this call might be as familiar with the UK higher education space. We might have, people from different contexts, but just to give a bit of context to that, we've got institutions here such as Manchester, Durham, St Andrews, that are kind of the more elite Russell Group institutions and of varying sizes. And then we've got some of the newer institutions such as Teesside University or University of Sunderland. But then we've also got alternative providers. So, for example, NCFE on there have an entirely different model focused around a further education or the lower end of education. So we've got a real range of different clients in education. As I say, we've got a range of different technical service areas. And over the last couple of years, the big topic has been artificial intelligence. And it's something that is increasingly cut across all of our service areas. So there's a cyber angle to this, there's a data angle to this, there's a development angle to this, but it also touches all of our clients in terms of whether it's an institution that's got one profile where they've got a large number of students. University of Manchester who are on there, they've got 50,000-60,000 students. We've got some smaller institutions. We've got some that are dealing on those 16 to 18-year-olds, some of the more conventional degree ages where they're 18 to 21. they're all, I suppose, grappling with the challenges of AI. So I'm going to talk a little bit first about the context of AI in education, then some of the use cases we're seeing in the sector and those that we've been involved in developing, some of the risks, challenges, limitations that we face when we're dealing with AI, and some effective strategies actually for implementing AI solutions. And I will try to answer the original question that we posed, I suppose, as well, around whether this is harmful, hopeful, or hype. So that's the rough agenda. As we said at the outset, I want to keep this quite interactive. So I will talk for a bit, but then there's a Slido where it'd be great if people could participate in that, and a few points where we can have some interaction and hopefully some questions and discussion at the end. So really looking forward to what people's opinions are, because actually the other thing that I would say, I referenced at the start the different teams that we have. Now, with my background in education, one of the things I specialise in is doing digital strategy work. So working with education clients to develop a digital strategy for their institution. And that often involves going out and speaking to staff and students and different stakeholders who actually sit out of IT, so sit outside of the technology space. In doing so, I would say AI is definitely the most divisive topic that we go out and speak to people about. In the context of a digital strategy, if you're talking about something like Wi-Fi and network connectivity, everyone agrees they would like the Wi-Fi to be good. When we're talking about AI, some people use it all the time. They're really familiar with it. They're really confident. They're annoyed that they can't use it more. And some people are really worried about it, really hate it, etc. So you get a real breadth of I guess, approaches and views on AI in terms of people. And generally, the maybe quality isn't great on these memes, but generally, when we think of AI in education, one of the challenges here is the immediate recourse and lots of conversations is to think about plagiarism, to think about academic integrity. So we've got a couple of memes there relating to people using ChatGPT to make up scholarly articles that they can reference, or using it to plagiarize and then failing. So that is typically where a lot of people's heads go immediately when they think of education. They think of AI. It's thinking about academic integrity. Would students, be cheating on assignments? How can we guard against that? And to some extent, what I would say is starting that from that quite risk-averse basis. So a lot of institutions that we work with, they may already have policies around AI, but it's been very much developed by those in the kind of teaching and learning domain. So the academic staff, it's not really necessarily been involved with the wider organization and engagement, say, with IT or the technical teams who might be looking after systems that have AI capabilities, etc. So we're often starting from quite a worried, risk-averse space, which is focused particularly on, as I say, student usage, plagiarism, and those kinds of issues. So thinking then about, in a bit of a broader context, what are some of the use cases and other areas that we might want to think about? And I've broken these into three categories. I think broadly it falls into use cases that relate to students, use cases that relate to teaching staff, and use cases that relate to, I guess, the operational function of different institutions. So starting with students on the left, I mentioned there the worries about plagiarism. One of the things that we have seen is people starting to figure out how you could have tools that are approved tools that students can use to assist with, for example, research, right? Finding those articles that they need to reference, helping them in terms of providing feedback often in quite a general sense in terms of writing advice, that kind of thing. Can it make their experience better? Can it speed up the enrollment process? For example, I've got a use case which kind of linked to that in this slide deck. Also thinking about from a student perspective, these students are going to be entering a workplace where there's an assumption that they'll understand a little bit about AI and how to use AI as that becomes increasingly part of everyone's working lives. And so setting them up to actually be able to use AI tools. In terms of teaching staff, we're thinking about things around feedback and marking. Okay, so how can AI enable that, speed that process up, allow them to spend more time, quality time with students? Can it help with lesson planning, course planning, that kind of stuff? Can it help with target setting and differentiation? Can the sort of data analysis capabilities of AI be an aid to teaching staff as well? So that's some of the conversations we're seeing there. But we're also seeing, I suppose, operationally, more of those back-end functions. How can AI support those? So can it be used as a chatbot for marketing and recruitment? Can it help to attract students to an institution? Can it be used to speed up? I've mentioned enrollment a couple of times, but can it be used to speed up enrollment processes that might be slow? And that's where institutions are losing learners, because actually that's taking too long, they're going somewhere else. What about things like room bookings or resource optimization? And there's a use case that I've encountered around policy documents, for example, right? An institution has loads and loads of policy documents. They all cross-reference each other. Can you use AI to make sure that if a policy changes in one domain that has a knock-on effect elsewhere, that it's tracking that and making sure that everything remains aligned? So lots of different ideas and use cases there. And this is where I would encourage people. As I say, we've got a Slido where the question is, what are the AI use cases you think have potential to improve student experience, save staff time, or deliver operational efficiency in education? So I'll leave that on the screen for a moment so people can follow that QR code to leave some comments. And what I'm going to do, I'll leave that up for a moment. I'm going to talk in detail about two of the actual use cases that we've implemented. And whilst I'm doing that, hopefully you guys are able to throw some of your ideas into that Slido, and then I'll revisit that after I've spoken through the use cases. So hopefully that makes sense. I've thrown some ideas out. I'd be keen to hear what ideas people have, what people are interested in. Throw those on there. And then as I talk through some other examples, we can return to them and sort of see what's coming from the wider community, and particularly interested to get the perspective from yourselves as business schools as well, and thinking about, I think your students in particular, I guess, would be expected on entering the world of work to maybe be engaging with these technologies and having an understanding of these technologies as well. So yeah, I can see that there are some things coming through on the Slido. You can also, I think, through Slido sort of upvote other people's suggestions as well. So feel free to do that, and we'll revisit that in a moment. So I'm just going to talk through two use cases that we've actually implemented as an organisation. And the reason I picked these two is I think they're quite different ends of the spectrum there of how easy they are to implement versus how complicated they are. And they highlight some of the benefits that can be delivered. And then hopefully this is an aid memoir to us then thinking about what the risks are and how we prioritize the deployment of artificial intelligence. So the first example we have is around document checks. So the problem statement we had with this client was that their students were required to upload evidence of identity as part of an application process. So this wasn't actually a university example, it's a further education example. So this is learners doing apprenticeships and NVQs in the UK. But as part of that application process, they had to upload a passport or alternative ID, so something like a UK driver's license. And what students were doing is a large number of their students on application were uploading any picture that they had on their desktop or on their phone just to get through the process, right? They couldn't be bothered to go and get a picture of their passport or driver license. So they just upload a picture because they can't be bothered. They get through the application process. That institution then receives this application. They go, yeah, this would be a great student. However, they haven't uploaded the requisite documentation. The staff are then having to contact the students and say, can you upload a driver's license? Can you upload a passport? A lot of people don't reply or ignore them. And so it's wasting time of the staff. It's meaning that a number of students who they would have given places to are not actually sort of onboarding and finishing that application process because they're not uploading those documents. So the solution was using Azure Document Intelligence. So that's an application within Azure. So those on a Microsoft kind of infrastructure can implement this fairly easily. It's already part of that application stack. And basically training document intelligence to verify that these are the documents that we're after. So it's basically saying, right, yeah, this is a driving license, this is a passport. And the other part of that training is to be able to grab data from it to speed up the application process. So the tool is going, right, there's their home address, there's their date of birth, there's their name, and we can pre-populate the application form. So training is the main challenge here. Can you get that application to quickly discern that this is the right document and pre-populate that form? And I guess in terms of the benefits then, the benefit is that the institution isn't having to waste as much staff time going back to students. And it might be that the odd one sneaks through that isn't the right document, or that actually there's an expired passport that's been missed and they have to go contact the student anyway. But it's certainly saving the institution time and the staff time, but it's also speeding up the application process for students, because you're saying, give us your driver's license or passport now, and actually that'll pre-populate the rest of the forms, and you can have a decision, in minutes onto whether you can get onto a particular course. So there's two benefits to that in terms of setting that up. The other thing to mention on this one is it was developed very, very quickly. This was sort of designed in an afternoon, and within a couple of weeks was a live thing that institution was using to help screen these applicants coming through for these apprenticeship courses. Moving then to the other end of the spectrum in terms of difficulty, and I guess the size of the challenge, we've got one right here around learner intervention. So students obviously withdraw from their studies for a number of reasons, and I wouldn't be surprised if there is stuff on the Slido around this topic of trying to understand when students are likely to drop out. And I guess part of the challenge here is there are a number of different markers of whether that student's going to drop out. It could be their attendance is poor. It could be that they've not logged into the virtual learning environment for a week. It could be that they've got poor grades, or grades have actually been getting progressively worse. There's a number of risk factors that could indicate that a student might be struggling in their studies and liable to drop out. And this example that we've just finished a project, so it'll be interesting to see what impact this has over time. So this one just finished a couple of weeks ago, but essentially what it was using AI, and I think this was a solution built in Databricks to look at these different variables, identify those students who are at risk of withdrawal, and rather than notifying a personal tutor, and there's that kind of time lag for that person to get in touch who's there, to essentially send an immediate message on WhatsApp that sort of said, hey, we noticed that you've not logged into the virtual learning environment in a while. Do you need a hand with anything? And signposting them to further support. So essentially using artificial intelligence to speed up that intervention. Now, this one's much more challenging to build and to do, partly because there are disparate data sets. So there's data in different places that are relevant to that student. There's also a lot of sensitivity, I guess, around some of these interventions, the reasons why students may be struggling. So there's quite strict boundaries to put in place around the artificial intelligence and what decisions it's making. And I think the thing that'll be interesting over time is to measure the success of those interventions. So as I speak, I know that we've built something that does this intervention. It'll be interesting to see if it has an impact on withdrawals over time. So that's something that we'll have to measure. And obviously there's a dual benefit there. If, on the one hand, there is the student who in some cases this could reduce students who are withdrawing from their studies. That would be really positive for them. But also there's a focus on institutional finances and the cost that has to the institution of students dropping out. So there's a couple of use cases that we've actually developed. So that's not, I guess going back to the original premise of this conversation, that is not hype. Those are things that we have done. But I guess what they highlight is not all AI use cases are equal, right? Some of them are low impact, some of them are high impact. So something like the document checker it's maybe saving time for a couple of staff who were having to do that role before. Something to do with, I guess, learner intervention, that has an impact on all of those providing support as personal tutors, for example. One of them is pretty low effort and low cost. One of them is a bit more high effort and a bit more high cost. So we've got to measure these different things in terms of what's low impact, what's high effort, thinking about the feasibility to implement them, what that value is that we're going to get from it, what the ethics are around this. As I said, I think in terms of the document ID, that's a bit easier because people consent to giving their identity over anyway when they're making an application. In something like the student withdrawal case, there's a bit more sensitivity there in terms of what might that student divulge to an AI tool and putting those appropriate checks and balances in place. So that's some of the considerations that we have. I'm going to, at this point, look at the Slido and just comment on some of the things that we've had on there. And I certainly think it'd be interesting to delve into some of these in more detail in terms of the questions as well, and give people a chance to comment on here. So I'm just going to move over, drag this in, and hopefully this works. Hopefully people can see that on the screen there, because the way I've been sharing screen. But so looking at some of those that have come through, handling routine student queries, deadlines, schedules, yeah, absolutely, via a chatbot. And often I guess the challenge there is, and I guess as I go through these, I'll think about some of those challenges when we're trying to plot it on that axis of what's low effort. I guess the thing there is, what's the source data for that, right? In terms of the deadlines and the schedules. One of the issues I've seen with chatbots is they need a good bank of sort of FAQs and data to be referring to, because otherwise they're going to be giving students the wrong information. So often that's that prerequisite that makes that maybe a higher effort use case that it should be, really. Yeah, lesson and assessment generation, that's absolutely something that I've seen talked about. I think the interesting thing there is almost, in some ways, it can feel a bit like a double standard, where academic staff are saying, well, we should be able to use AI to plan out our lessons and plan assessments, but there's, students shouldn't be using it to respond to those. So I think it's an interesting conversation of how that balances against students being enabled and empowered to use AI tools themselves. Yeah, AI tutors for Q&A, exactly. And that links to, I guess, the example that I just discussed in terms of, AI can respond 24/7. If a student's having a challenge or an issue, or they've got a question, it could be 2 a.m. that occurs to them and they want to ask that. And it's not reasonable for their tutor to be online at 2 a.m. to respond to it. Personalized learning paths and sort of feedback. I think those two are kind of related to each other, but yeah, absolutely, that's something that we're hearing people talk about. And again, it's that drawing that line. In the case of feedback, interestingly, and this is something I'll talk about in a moment, there's a thing there around the human in the loop element, is the phrasing that we've been seeing a lot recently of, okay, AI can provide that first level of feedback, but ultimately, is there a staff member there who I guess checks for the quality of that and kind of validates that and says, yeah, that's the kind of feedback we want to be providing to students. Yeah, using AI to look at survey results and try and identify improvements. Yeah, that's a good suggestion. And again, that one I think is quite a fairly low risk in terms of that. The AI could do the analysis. It's not going to be implementing the solution to try and improve education. Yeah, preparing case studies, chatbots come up again, feedback again. Enrollment, recruitment, board of examiners, yeah, that's really interesting. I guess board of examiners is an interesting example as well. One of the things that we'll come on to when we're looking at that, I guess that matrix of effort, high effort, low effort, high impact, low impact. One of the phrases I use quite a lot is use it on what slows you down, not what makes you special, right? So, in the context of UK higher education, and I'm sure it's the same in other contexts as well, quite a lot of institutions had to cut back on staff numbers. And so, when you're talking about AI, people are thinking, "Are you just going to replace everybody with artificial intelligence?" And the way I'd phrase it is, actually, could AI reduce the time that you're sat in board of examiners meetings for hours on end and enable you to spend more time with students and doing the stuff that's really, really valuable? Definitely stuff here around workflows and approval steps and communications. Yeah. Creative industries is an interesting one, actually, and in work strategy work we've done previously, there is an element of your design students, your photography students. There are creative fields, music, that are actually really directly impacted, and there may be skills and things that are expected in the future from employers for students in those domains, and so they need to be across those. Yeah. Okay. I think a lot of those are getting to some of those really similar use cases, which is great to see. And I'll be interested to see what comes through in some of the questions at the end as well. But no, they're great. So thank you for that. And we'll, as I say, we'll hopefully revisit some of those in questions at the end. So I've spent, I suppose, a little bit, I guess the first half of what I've been talking about there is being really positive and trying to say, yeah, we can use AI, don't worry about the plagiarism stuff so much. We can use AI, we've got some use cases, some are more difficult than others, etc. That said, we can't be entirely cavalier about this and just go, yeah, you can all crack on and use AI for your research or use it for your feedback. And I think I've hinted already a little bit about some of the risks and some of the things that we do to mitigate those risks. I think the first risk is there is always, it's always worth remembering that there are issues around accuracy of information and bias. And I think we were having an internal meeting yesterday where we were talking about, AI is just another technology and it's similar to, all of these other technologies. And I think there is one caveat on that, which is if you compare most artificial intelligence tools to something like a piece of code someone's written to build a Power App, right, in Microsoft, you could run that Power App 100 times and you'll get the same result 100 times because you have told it when X and Y happens, then Z has to happen. And it will go, yeah, okay, X, Y, Z, X, Y, Z. Artificial intelligence will sometimes not do what you expect in a different way. So there is definitely something in that around that accuracy information. And that's why that second bullet point is really, really important. So having that human in the loop element is really crucial to say that actually someone is going to check this information. So just to reference a different use case which we're working on at the moment is around students who have applied to a university and they might be eligible for funding or scholarships based on certain criteria. So we can use an AI tool because there's obviously lots of applications that come in, lots of data, and the AI can check who is eligible and who is not for that funding, right? So that's fine. What we're not doing is saying that the AI then decides. So the AI does the first check of these are the students we think are eligible. The person who presses the button to say, yeah, that person's getting the scholarship, that's still a human being. And so that's really important that we don't just fully automate and go, yeah, AI can solve that. There's got to be a human in the loop who has that final decision of, okay, the AI thinks these 5 people are eligible. Yep, I can check they are eligible. Great. And actually, you also probably need an appeals function for people who are not determined to be eligible as well. So it can massively speed things up. It stops someone looking at all of this information, but as long as there's a human making that final decision. I think there are obvious cybersecurity risks, which I'm sure people will be familiar with in terms of AI being used as a tool for people to access stuff they shouldn't be able to access. And I guess that's something that we're seeing increasingly people's cybersecurity teams and functions being mindful of. There are also data security risks, data security risks in terms of data being breached. And I guess there's an element here of one of the things we're really keen to do is direct people towards the safe tools and the safe use cases. And I think if you say to your students, for example, AI is never acceptable, never, ever, ever, never use AI, it's going to push them to using unsafe tools. Similarly, around staff, for example, if you enable Copilot, for example, as something that staff can use, it's really important to encourage that, because what you don't want is then putting, for example, data that shouldn't go out into the public domain into a tool that isn't within your environment. So, for example, if you've got Copilot enabled, and I don't know how many institutions on here, people have taken that step of enabling Microsoft Copilot. If that's the approved tool and that data stays within the organization, that's great. What you've really got to make sure people understand then is, don't be putting data that should be staying within the organization into something like ChatGPT or DeepSeek or something like that that's external. And the final point there around academic integrity and value for money, the reason I've phrased it like that is, and I've been keen at the start, I'm not going to talk a lot about plagiarism and that kind of thing. I think there maybe is a risk. For example, we talked about chatbots, and it came up quite a lot in Slido. If all institutions around the world implement chatbots and students are using chatbots for that interaction, I wouldn't be surprised if in a few years some institutions start saying, we're not using any chatbots and you can speak to a human, and that becomes their USP. So I think there's a balance there in terms of providing that student experience and value for money. Ethics is also a big part of this. So having a clear AI policy for students, I think I referenced that most institutions seem to have that. Thinking about what tools are approved and that's available to people. As I say, I would caution against just banning everything. I think you've got to say these are the approved tools and this is what they're approved for. Is there an option here on the third bullet point to acknowledge that AI content and say there's space there? People reference research in the Slido, people being encouraged to acknowledge and reference where they have used artificial intelligence. Being really clear on what's prohibited is important, and prohibited AI use cases. And then the final point of who has oversight over this, who's responsible for ensuring that these policies are adhered to. The other thing you might have noticed is I'm quite light here, and I can talk in a bit more detail if people really want me to, but on the specific tools. So a lot of the work we've been doing recently, I'm saying to clients, to institutions, I'm not going to come in and say, you should use this tool for this or this tool for that, because I don't know in 3, 4, 5 years' time what that landscape's going to be. But what you can say is, this is the governance process for deciding what is acceptable. So you might have a page that says, these are the approved tools. Every 3 months, a governance group gets together and reviews those tools and decides what is or isn't acceptable. And so you can set out your governance process for that now, and that can be reactive to if new tools come along, if certain tools become less popular, etc. So that's a key point as well. What are some of the limitations and challenges? I think in the examples I talked about, a key one is data availability and data maturity. I've already mentioned that one of the challenges around chatbots is, what is their data source? If, for example, you have a chatbot that's meant to be there to deal with student queries around examination, arrangements, say, where is that chatbot looking for the details of the examination arrangements? If you've got some information in the VLE, some information on your website, some information in this handbook, and any contradictory, how does the AI know what to look at? So there's an element of data availability and data maturity being set up correctly before we implement certain AI use cases. In the example of the document checker, when people are applying, that's less of a problem because they're coming in as new students, so the data is entirely new. In that example of the learner analytics, that's more complicated because you do have a student as an individual with all of these data points coming off them in terms of, as I said, when did they last log into the VLE? When did they last turn up to class? What have their grades looked like over the previous few months? So you've got more data points that you need to pull together. Deciding where to invest and getting that investment is a challenge. I think and part of the challenge here, and I'll be interested to hear from people on the call their thoughts on this around. One of the things that I hear quite a lot is there is pressure from senior leadership teams, from vice chancellors, etc., to say we want to be using AI. AI is the future. They've heard so much about it. It's in the news. Government are talking about it. We need to be at the forefront of using it. Now, when I come along and say you should use it to check documents, that's not maybe quite as sexy or interesting or inspiring as they were hoping. And so it's getting that investment in the right tools. You can spend a lot of money on something flashy AI tool, but a lot of use cases we've been involved in are a bit more practical in terms of delivering tangible benefit to people. I guess that links that expectation management for those non-technical stakeholders in terms of what the capability is of AI, and also just because it is capable of things, what parameters we want to put around it. When I gave that example of the tool that is looking to see if people are eligible for scholarships, you might think, well, let's just automate the entire process and that will make things easier. But there's reasons to put limitations there, and it's being able to articulate those to different stakeholders. The final point I've got on here is culture and digital literacy. And as I said, I think there's a huge difference of opinion between your students, your staff, in terms of AI and these topics. As you'll notice, I've got my catchphrase here at the bottom on using it on what slows you down, not what makes you special, I think is a key thing here. And when we work with different institutions and we say, they might say, do you know what, we're really well known for our specialist, medical labs, and that's the thing we've built our reputation on. I'd say, well, keep AI away from that for now, right? And keep doing what you're doing there. Let's try and understand what bits of your organization aren't working as well as they could or are working slowly, and we'll use AI to try and improve that. So how do we actually go? We've got loads of different use cases, loads of different ideas that people are throwing together. They've been fantastic. The thing that we've been supporting different clients with is AI strategy work. So these AI strategies generally cover these different topic areas. So I've mentioned there right at the end of the last slide, culture and engagement. Okay, being clear with people, this is what's approved, this is what isn't, and we're going to support you, train you, provide guidance on using the tools rather than hiding away from it. What the governance process is, how often these policies are going to be reviewed, how often we're going to look at what tools are acceptable and which ones aren't. Long-term projects. So if, for example, you really wanted to do the learner analytics use case and say we want to put something in that's going to look at learner performance and intervene to support learners, and it might be that actually you've got to make sure you can get all of your data into a data warehouse and into the same format and aligned with the student ID. So that might be a longer term data project, but you can say, well, we're going to do that first and then we'll come to the use case later. I think it's also worthwhile having some of those little agile use cases in play. So that can range from stuff like the document ID check, which is quite easy to put in place, or a pilot of things like Microsoft Copilot. Say, do you know what, we're going to let this team use Copilot to see how it can help them and support them in what they're doing, and find those little use cases. The other way to think about this, and we've been supporting people with this, is on 3 different levels. So you kind of got the personal level, so you as an individual, tools that can help you in your working life. Then at a team level, so are there team functions that we could use AI? So that document sort of ID checker example, there's an admissions and enrollment team there who are having to pick up that work. That tool's changing how their team works. And then anything that's organizational wide, thinking about what are the big things that you could do that could improve everyone's experience as well. So there's a few different ways that you can kind of split this up in terms of this. I think the other thing to be mindful of that we've got on here is thinking about your maturity and the different levels of maturity that you might have. So it might be that actually you've got some good tools, you've got some good infrastructure in place, you've got some integrations that actually mean you could crack on and start using some of these use cases. The flip side of that might be that culturally people are really resistant to it and nobody's bought into it, and that you haven't got any of the compliance or governance elements that you need in place. So it might be that you're ahead in one area and behind in another. So understanding your maturity and where you are on that journey is really, really important. So I'm going to stop talking a moment and see what questions we've had come in. I think I don't know whether to sit on the fence or not on this, really. I think most clients are in one place or another on this. They either are very, very worried and are very locked down. And I guess going back to the points I was making around plagiarism, we have some clients who are not using this at all. We have some who've been very relaxed and things are the Wild West a little bit, and people are using it for AI for all sorts of things. And I guess we're somewhat sitting in the middle of that and saying, you can use AI. There are safe ways to use AI that make people's working lives better and actually can enhance and improve student experience. However, there's also a lot of controls and things you need to put in place to be able to do that safely. So I think we sit in the middle of that spectrum. There is a lot of hype out there. I would say there's probably some validity to thinking there's a hype thing, because actually, you know, fundamentally, there are some things about the student experience, learner experience that wouldn't and shouldn't change. But I do think it's here to stay. There's nothing we're going to be able to do to get rid of it. And so I'm somewhere in between harmful and hopeful. I think we can balance those two things. We don't want to be too risk averse where we don't use it at all and it pushes people to using unsafe tools. But we don't want to just use it for everything. We need to use it where it's sensible and have appropriate controls in place. That was a very fence city and kind of a prevaricating answer. The final thing, I guess, is a bit of a call to action. I've got another QR code on screen here, where if you want to put your details in there, and we're going to pick 3 winners to have a bit of a readiness workshop, and going back to that maturity level where we can kind of benchmark where you are and give you some suggestions. So a kind of 2-hour workshop, and we'll give you some recommendations out of that. So if people are interested, please do follow that QR code, provide your email, and we will pick some winners. Don't worry in terms of if you're not chosen, we will get rid of your email, etc. We don't want to keep any of that information, but do follow that QR code. If you're interested in having, I guess, a further conversation, we could talk about your specific institution and try and assess where you are on that readiness to engage with AI. That's me finished with my presentation. I'm going to jump over to questions. If anyone has any questions, I don't know if they're going to appear for me in the chat. There is a Q&A. Oh no, there's a question about the sound. Was the sound okay for everybody? I hope so.
Yeah, I think that was the only question. I hope they managed to work out their sound. I mean, it was working fine for me. I was able to hear you loud and clear. But yeah, thank you once again to our partners, Waterstones, Stan, Joanne, and Jen. Thank you all for joining us and for your interactions. I hope everyone else enjoyed the sessions as much as I did. And of course, if you missed anything, don't worry, because the recording and the slides will be available in the post-event comms and on the Amber and BJ website by sometime next week. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us, and take care. Have a lovely afternoon. Bye-bye.
Thanks all.